Okay, so there's been a lot going on around Donald Trump's visit to the UK. I did make that video initially. By the way, that smoke you see is just incense burning, in case you're wondering. Helps me to relax. Yeah, so there's been a lot of things going on around this visit, and I don't think I could have included everything in one video. And even now, I don't intend to. So I might make one or two more videos on this. But the this has been a very busy few days news-wise. There's been a lot going on. I mean, already we're on to the next story, which is the Trump-Putin summit, and inevitably I'll probably make a video about that as well. But anyway, focusing on one thing at a time, I want to just talk about the anti-Trump protesters here in the UK. I did mention it, of course, in the last video, but I want to expand that a little bit. I've just seen a video by Channel 4, and it was entitled "Drag Queens Against Trump," which, as per the title, was drag queens against Trump from across the UK, from Manchester, from London. Um, and they were very colourful, as you would expect, and very vocal about Trump. Here's my issue with the protesters, and I mean a lot of the protesters. Firstly, I think there is hypocrisy to be found in some of the things that some of the pontificating that they're coming out with. In terms of the lack of consistency, and I'll come back to that. But also, I think some of the protesters are making themselves look ridiculous. And I'm not talking about necessarily the drag queens, because they are by their nature exuberant. They're eccentric. They revel in it. That's what they do, and that's fine. I'm talking about other people who are just making fools out of themselves, really. Um, I support the right to protest, and I was very, clear about that. Because there were some on the right who were saying, "Oh, they should be banned. They're embarrassing the country, etc., etc." No, I think they have a right to protest. That's a fundamental aspect of democracy. And Donald Trump is not above criticism. I do believe that some British Trump supporters are a bit too, frankly, blinded by their admiration of Trump and their opposition to things like the EU, which Trump has been vocal against. It's a very polarizing subject, and I think both the loony left and the hard right have been galvanized by it. Um, the visits happened, and the good news is the speculated violence between left wing and right wing demonstrators did not transpire. So that may be that there wasn't that intention, or it may be down to good policing. I don't know. I know that within London, the Metropolitan Police were quite strict about the application for pro Tommy Robinson demonstrators um, to meet up with pro Trump people. They speculated there'd be trouble, and that never went ahead. And a lot of the Tommy Robinson people were angry about that. But that was applied evenly because the Metropolitan Police also put restrictions on anti-Trump protesters in London, so it was applied evenly. Um, I think it's a balancing act within a democracy of allowing people to dissent whilst also having a degree of common sense regarding security. I mean, if you allow dissent to its absolute, then you would allow the protesters to, throw eggs at Donald Trump, and clearly that's just, you know. So of course there has to be a degree of security, because no matter how controversial a foreign leader is, even the leader of an allied country, embarrassing him or her on the spot on their visit isn't necessarily going to do us any favors. Um, Donald Trump himself, it has to be said, and I'm only going to reference this briefly because I was going to talk about the demonstrators in this. Donald Trump in classic Trumpian style, flip flopped. You know, he gave that interview with his son where he was very vocal and he made very disrespectful comments about Theresa May before visiting. Like it's a hot situation over there, and you know, I saw that as cheap shots. The Daily Mirror was very vocal in they had a big headline, "How dare you?" I might have it actually if I can get it handy. Yeah, here we go. Because I bought a lot of different newspapers just to, you know, it's not something that's going to happen every day. So the Daily Mirror headline, "How dare you?" President embarrasses Prime Minister with attack on her plan for soft Brexit. He claims Brits like me a lot as tens of thousands. Oh, excuse me, that's the other Daily Mirror. Got so many newspapers over this. Yeah, here we go. Just bear with me a second. You insult our country, attack our NHS, embarrass our Queen, undermine our special relationship, humiliate our PM, and then smugly pose in Winston Churchill's armchair. How dare you? Now, to outside viewers, the Daily Mirror is a left wing tabloid, which is unusual. Most British tabloids are right wing. This one's left wing. And that's their cover. Just show you. Some of those points are valid criticism. Humiliate the Queen. Excuse me, embarrass the Queen. I think they're reading too much into that. Apparently, there was some footage of Trump walking in front of her. I think they're reading a bit too much into that. However, I do think he was disrespectful to the Prime Minister. And then, you know, one of the main things about Trump supporters, and I promise I won't go on about this because I meant to, you know, this was meant to be about protesters. But I will say this before I forget. They say, oh, he just tells it like it is. That's one of the main catch points of Trump supporters. Well, actually, he flip flops all the time. I think the man is a pathological liar. I mean, he will take cheap shots one day and then come out with gushing praise the next. Make up your mind, Donald. I mean, that's one of my biggest issues with Trump. And I think Trump supporters are blind to it. They say, oh, it's just his eccentric personality, but that's a crass lack of diplomacy. You know, to one day take a cheap shot at ministerial tensions, and then the next day say, oh, she's doing a fantastic job. Make up your mind. Anyway, getting back to the protesters. Okay, so these drag queens were saying they were taking issue with his stance on gay rights, and they were pointing to some of the people, some of the right wing conservatives that he's pandered to. That may be a fair point, but what I take issue with their position is they then go on to talk about diversity and this wonderful diversity we have, and he insults Muslims. Well, where is there protests against Islamic death cults like ISIS, who would want them thrown from buildings? That's what I don't understand about the LGBT lobby when they're so vocal about Trump, and they simultaneously are among the first to shout Islamophobia. It's a bizarre thing that they have to have this courting of Islamism. I've never understood that because Islamism, gay rights are polar opposites. So if you're a drag queen and you hate Trump, that okay, fine, but at least be consistent. Um, I saw a photo earlier where it showed London during Erdogan's visit, London during King Salman's visit. It was quiet streets, no protests, very little protests. Now, Donald Trump may be a bigger world leader than either, but there is something to be said about the hypocrisy of a lot of the left wing protesters that they don't show the same consistency. They charge Trump with sexism, racism, homophobia. Some of those points may have some merit. I think Trump supporters are a little bit blinded in their defense of Trump. On the other hand, is Donald Trump personally, does he hate women? Does he hate gay people? Does he is he a racist, as in a white supremacist? I think Donald Trump's a populist. I think he's an opportunist, and I think he panders to whichever crowd he is addressing. I think he's a bit insincere in many regards, but I think he is more an opportunist than a hate-filled individual. That's my feeling about Trump. That doesn't mean it's okay. I think pandering to certain groups. I mean, his line on the KKK was absurd. But when you have protesters, they say, "Oh, it's just a bit of British humour," but really, um, it's one thing putting that blimp in the air and saying it's all very funny, but wanting to go everywhere where the president was going and just determined to just make fools out of themselves by ridiculous infantile antics. It's one thing if it was just adult protests and saying we have genuine concerns about Trump's positions. But it was some of the stunts that people were coming out with I couldn't get away with. It was just, they're charging Trump with being infantile, and in some ways he is, but they were no better. Um, One thing I would say to American Trump supporters, though, drop this thing about, oh, you British are attacking Trump. Let's put this in context. So we're a few thousand protesters. Let's even say 10,000, the bigger demos. I don't know the exact figures, but it certainly wasn't massive. This is a country of 66 million people. Many British people are actually supportive of Trump. So let's just drop this thing about the British are against Trump. Yes, it was controversial. Um, it was also controversial when President Bush visited. But Trump has British supporters as well. So I want to just be clear about that because it's setting a false narrative. Um, yeah, but when people come out with these buzzwords, diversity and everyone coming together, and it's just virtue signaling nonsense. Because when you actually dig a little bit deeper, and when you scrutinize some of these things, it becomes problematic. When you have, for example, gay rights activists talking about the beauty of diversity, and they fail to recognize that includes, if you take it to its extreme, unchecked immigration with people coming in who may well have ultra conservative Islamist views. Now, I'm not saying we have an open door policy, but that's what they're basically advocating, and that is nonsense. I mean, I saw one of the protesters saying, "Oh, we dream of a world without nations and without borders." I mean, keep passing the dope around. It's just that's where the loony left do themselves no favors. I'm not talking about people on the left in general. There's many left-leaning people I think are very reasonable, and they make valid points in their criticism of Trump. But some of these demonstrations have been cringeworthy. They really have. You could dismiss them as being, oh, light-hearted British humour, but would they be using the same line if, let's say, right-wing people done similar protests against Obama? No, they would say, oh, you're racists. So there is definitely hypocrisy in there as well. I'll leave it there. I'm saying this not as a Trump supporter. I have no interest in going out of my way to defend Donald Trump. I take many issues with Trump's positions. But in the end of the day, the United States is a close partner. And I get that it makes some people feel good by, hating Trump. But one woman came out and said, oh, Trump is responsible for all the world's problems. That's the sort of thinking that is just ridiculous. Really? So Trump's responsible for Islamist death cults blowing people up, enslaving women, throwing gay men off buildings? Trump's responsible for Chinese maritime expansionism? Trump's responsible for Russian expansionism and aggression? The list goes on. Trump's responsible for violent Mexican drug cartels? Trump is in a very powerful position and he holds a lot of accountability, or he should hold a lot of accountability, but the idea that he's to blame for all the world's problems is utter nonsense. As if before 2016 the world was a rosy place with no problems. Come on.